Law vs. Zoro is a matchup that is commonly discussed within the One Piece community and quite passionately, and I feel it's a matchup that can very easily be misconstrued based on who you're talking to and what they value within a fight. And similar to my video on Marco vs. Sanji, I want to first talk about the narrative as they currently stand. Zoro, simply put, is Luffy's right-hand man, and as much as certain Sanji fans who think that he's equal to Zoro, or Zoro fans who think that he's stronger than Luffy may not like it, he is pretty clearly the second strongest on the crew. Maybe once upon a time Zoro and Luffy were far closer in strength. Even then it's made pretty clear just based on pure portrayal wise that Luffy was always ahead of him, even if they did show some level of relativity. Even regarding statements such as this one, which states that Zoro competes for the first and second place among the Straw Hats. The person that is in first place does not compete for second place. Luffy, in this example, only competes for first place. Zoro competes for first place with Luffy while at the same time competing for second place with Sanji. Under this idea, Zoro is always going to be a runner-up to Luffy while still being just ahead of Sanji. Portrayal-wise, Zoro should almost always be above Sanji yet below Luffy, and I think that's a pretty simple concept to grasp. This pretty much means, once again, as much as a lot of Zoro fans may hate it, he will almost always play second fiddle to Luffy. Even in the eyes of Rob Lucci, he is quite literally a consolation prize. That being compared to defeating Luffy, who he considers above Zoro. Zoro is to Luffy what Rayleigh is to Roger, what Ben Beckman is to Shanks, you get the point. In comparison, Law, similarly to Kid, has always held the narrative of being a rival to Luffy. Just to be clear, being rivals does not make you equal. I think that should be fairly obvious. But these three are consistently treated as rivals throughout the entire narrative, from their introduction to Wano to the rooftop to their bounties, and to the events after Wano. Even if you think that Luffy is stronger, which you should, if you don't, I'd question if you even read the story, given that even amongst the three, Luffy has his own narrative compared to them. He fights a Yonko on his own while they team up on another. But regardless, especially prior to Luffy getting Conqueror's Coding, they are treated as being on the same level more or less. And granted, on the topic of Luffy getting Conqueror's Coding and kind of getting that upgrade above that level, this is also still pre-awakening Kid and Law, to where you could argue that they then had their own upgrades equivalent to that, and that it's actually just Gear 5 where Luffy really begins to pull ahead. Not saying that is the case, but it's at least something that you could argue for, as I don't think it's by coincidence that all three of these characters seem to get an upgrade in some way around the same time. Zoro fights essentially two commanders, as Lucci seems to compare himself in a similar fashion to Kizaru on Egghead, with Law and Kid both going on to fight Yonkos. Granted, they lost, one more one-sided than the other. Regardless, the point is that narratively Law is portrayed on a higher level than Zoro, even in Dressrosa when it came to Law fighting Doflamingo alongside Luffy. But portrayal is not everything, so moving on to how they stack up in comparison to each other in a combat setting. Beginning with Zoro for one, especially during Wano, gets massively stronger than he once was even prior to getting Conqueror's Coding, being able to damage Dragon Form Kaido. But one thing that I think is worth mentioning is that he couldn't control Enma, which a lot of people seem to view as a nerf. I don't know why this is. I don't know if people just see this and think immediately that it's a nerf without really doing any further thinking on it. But if Enma takes a certain amount of haki from Zoro, it could be taking excessive amounts of haki from Zoro, which is more than likely the case, doing far more damage than Zoro is typically capable of doing at this point. So it would be hard to call this a nerf rather than, if anything, an amplification. This to me is made obvious when, even with the help of Killer, Zoro couldn't even actually damage a base Kaido, who should be significantly less durable than his dragon form given his scales, and just the fact that Zoan forms typically make you more durable in general. So it presents the idea that given that Zoro didn't actually do anything to get stronger, that these feats are heavily influenced by Enma. You can get exhausted from using haki. Zoro going all out with his haki could even kill him. So to maintain the usage of Enma, he just learns to accept that rather than fighting back against it or resisting it, and just puts all of his haki into Enma, including Conqueror's haki, which leads to him then unlocking Conqueror's Coding, hence the change of this purple aura to a green aura. But I say all this to refer to the fact that it's pointless to refer to the fact that Zoro couldn't control Enma, because his feat on Kaido was essentially his peak. It's not like Zoro necessarily got stronger later on when he allowed Enma to take that haki. These should be in general around the same strength. This feat on Kaido was essentially his peak beyond his normal capabilities at the time. The green aura is just an indication of Zoro's control. All that's happening is Zoro allowing for that haki to flow rather than it just being taken. For all intents and purposes, this Zoro shouldn't be any weaker than this Zoro, barring the fact that now he can apply this to all his swords since it's not just Enma, which to be fair is pretty relevant. 3 swords would do more damage than 1 sword, but he also does at one point use a 1 sword attack on King, and it affects him just like any of his other attacks that he used. So there's at least not any drastic or quantifiable difference. You could bring up the fact that there's no Black Lightning and so there's no Conqueror's Haki, but we know that Enma does take the use of Zoro's Conqueror's Haki because Kaido stated Zoro used it when attacking him. So despite the lack of Black Lightning, we know that Enma does use Conqueror's Haki, which may bring me to a bit of a controversial point, but it's that Ashura was most likely using Conqueror's Coding. A lot of Zoro fans have attempted to argue that Dead Man's Game is not a Conqueror's Coding attack to then upscale all of Zoro's actual Conqueror's Coding attacks. To say, oh, he did this to Kaido when he was much weaker and not using Conqueror's Coding, and therefore all of these attacks will do the same thing if not better. But that's just unlikely. For one, whenever talking about Enma taking his Haki, Zoro never once differentiates Conqueror's Haki. To him, it's just Haki. Haki is Haki. And we know that Enma does indeed also use Conqueror's Haki, again because of what Kaido says. If it were to help him increase his attack against Kaido, it would have had to have been Conqueror's Coding. But it's also worth mentioning, and why I went over Zoro taming Enma first, that the way in which Zoro learns to control Enma is not by stopping his Haki from pouring out, but allowing that to happen, and just controlling that Haki rather than fighting against it. In this specific moment, Zoro literally tells Law that this is the limit of his ability. This is an attack where he is putting all of his Haki and strength into it, because he understands he needs this attack to either just outright try to take down Kaido or do significant damage, so there would be no reason to hold back. Granted, yes, he was exhausted at this point and had like 30 broken bones. It is still just based on what he can physically do in this moment with his capabilities, and putting his all into this one attack as a last resort. What he does in this panel against Kaido is just essentially what he does later against King, and allowing all of his Haki to flow through Enma, though on a somewhat lesser scale most likely, as Zoro still has to maintain himself against King to use this for more than just one attack. Zoro just flat out does put everything he has into this one attack and is unable to even get up afterwards. If anything, again, a bit of a controversial argument to make, but if anything, due to the extremes of his condition afterwards to where he literally cannot move, this attack is him going completely all out. He, again, quite literally cannot move after this attack. And so you could argue he's going all out even beyond what he later does against King. The only reason I feel it's not fair to say that and then argue that this attack is stronger than all of his other attacks is because of how fatigued he is. But then again, this is also Ashura, so this just should be stronger than those attacks normally speaking. Even the statement that Dragon Damnation is the pinnacle of Zoro's swordsmanship doesn't really indicate it would really have to be stronger, because it could just again refer to the control that he has. Swordsmanship obviously has to do with control rather than something unintentionally happening, so this statement wouldn't be wrong even under that interpretation. But even if you think that Dragon Damnation is stronger than Dead Man's Game, it just shouldn't be too far behind for the reasons discussed. And this isn't to say that Zoro is weak or anything or downplay him in the slightest. It's just the case that his basic Conqueror's Coding attacks are not going to be doing permanent Kaido scarring damage just because their Conqueror's Coding and Dead Man's Game isn't. Even though again, I think you can argue pretty fairly that Dead Man's Game is Conqueror's Coding. Regardless, Zoro still does have those capabilities. He can still obviously do damage on the level of permanently scarring Kaido, but not in just normal, no-named random Conqueror's Coding attacks that a lot of Zoro fans would like you to believe. And I think that's simply a fair assessment to make. His attacks are getting blocked by Rob Lucci, with it in fact being stated that they fought on equal terms during their fight. And despite being in a hurry, as Zoro states verbatim, he only managed to defeat him 3 chapters later, where Lucci in fact didn't even go down, when there is absolutely zero reason to believe that Zoro was holding back at any point in this fight, especially when there's indications that he just wasn't holding back Conqueror's Coding or King of Hell. But what I think solidified my belief of like Zoro's understanding of his own Haki and how he definitely doesn't hold back is when in Elbaf, Zoro still doesn't even understand that he can use Conqueror's Coding. So when he's allowing his Haki to flow, as he states when he's using Enma, and that's the way he tames Enma to use it properly, it's not like he's selecting which Haki to use, like normal Haki versus Conqueror's Haki. Again, to him, Haki is Haki. There is no differentiation between Conqueror's Haki and normal Haki. So when he allows his Haki to flow, that is all of his Haki, including Conqueror's Haki, which is how he tames Enma to begin with. Why would he then go on to fight Lucci and stop doing what he learned in order to tame Enma, with Luffy even stating that it's quite literally flowing out of him constantly? Honestly, arguing that Zoro was holding back at any point after Wano is just completely redundant after these statements. But again, I have to keep saying this is not to downplay Zoro. It is perfectly fine to say that Zoro can fight normally on par with Rob Lucci, while also having much stronger attacks that can permanently permanently scar Yonkos. But again, it's simply not the case that his normal attacks are just this strong, or even his normal Conqueror's Coding attacks are that strong, nor is it the case that he can simply spam these attacks. Now, the next thing I want to address is Zoro's speed. I'll briefly address the Kaido scene once again because people like to use this to say that Zoro can blitz Kaido, but this point is also pretty redundant. This Kaido is clearly holding back and sandbagging. He hadn't even used Conqueror's Coding at this point. Granted, Kaido actually did dodge Zoro's attacks earlier. I really don't even feel like that's worth mentioning because it's more PTSD than anything. It's clear the reason that he is dodging is because Zoro is using Conqueror's Coding here, or Enma is influencing him, or whatever you want to say there. But when Luffy uses Conqueror's Coding and is very clearly depicted as being the strongest at this point on the roof, Kaido still doesn't start dodging until later on. In reality, if Kaido truly feared Zoro enough, he would have just dodged Deadman's game, because he's clearly more than fast enough to do that if he actually tries. And he also dodges a normal Red Rock at one point, so I think Kaido just picks and chooses what he does and doesn't want to dodge. So I mean, unless you're claiming that Zoro is capable of consistently blitzing a hybrid Kaido when he was extremely weakened with 30 broken bones, yet went on to fight equally with Rob Lucci and was comparable to him in speed, then yeah, that's just an unserious take. But addressing the scene directly, I just don't really see this as a blitz. Kaido was clearly initially able to parry his attacks. It's just that when Kaido's arms are above his head, his midsection was exposed and Zoro, seeing an opportunity, just managed to tag him. In the same chapter, Luffy moves so fast, it's a similar effect shown to when Sanji disappears from Queen's perception. And even after this, Luffy moves so fast that Kaido is still looking to where Luffy previously was, which is a pretty clear blitz. Kaido didn't even react to the fact that Luffy was gone. But of course, this same Kaido is then later able to fight on par with the same Luffy. So him holding back drastically in regards to speed and reaction time at this point is pretty undeniable, and this was directly after Zoro fought him. Blitzing Kaido simply isn't impressive unless Kaido is going all out, especially when Law himself blitzes the same Kaido with injection shot. Granted, this was a surprise attack that Kaido wasn't expecting. Regardless, Kaido wasn't able to react to Law or his attack, and Law also then puts up antibacterial curtain before Kaido can even hit him. Law actually manages to outspeed Kaido quite a few times, such as with Demolition Gust or when he teleports Kinemon and the others before Kaido can hit them, dodging him, etc. Zoro also has the feat of reacting to Demolition Gust, and so I think it's safe to say that they're pretty comparable speed-wise, but I do give the edge to Law just because, again, he reacts to and even at times outspeeds hybrid Kaido more than Zoro. Even the fact that he's able to teleport Zoro here and align himself for injection shot requires him to be reacting to the speed that Kaido moves at, if not even faster. Beyond their Wano comparisons, Lucci doesn't really compare directly to Law in any way, and Law doesn't do anything specific in regards to speed against Blackbeard. So speed-wise, I'd again just say that they're pretty relative, if not Law being slightly ahead. Now in regards to attack potency, or just how much damage they can do, this should also go to Law. Literally every attack that he has can damage Yonko's, Awakening aside, whereas without Conqueror's Coding, Zoro hasn't been shown to damage characters on that level, and while Zoro's strongest attacks can permanently scar Yonkos, Law's can break their bones and cause them so much damage that Big Mom actually needs to heal to continue fighting. Kaido proceeds to just get up in like seconds after taking Zoro's attack and proceed to fight Luffy 2 different times before he even gets to Gear 5. It's hard to compare Kaido and Big Mom, but again, this is a Kaido who was holding back and wasn't even coding himself in Conqueror's Haki versus Big Mom when she's heavily soul amped. When at least from a portrayal standpoint, Big Mom is somewhat depicted as being equal to this version of Kaido when they're standing together on the roof, and this version of Kaido is the same one that Zoro scarred. So if they are equal at this point in time, then Big Mom then gets even stronger, and Law was able to damage that Big Mom, a Big Mom stronger than the one who was equal to Kaido who Zoro scarred. Law would have a significantly better feat, but of course you don't have to believe this. This is just my opinion based on pure paneling and portrayal being done here. But even despite that, I don't think that it should be too crazy to say that a soul amped Big Mom is above a holding back sober hybrid Kaido, and I say sober because he gets stronger in his drunken forms. I think if Big Mom was that much weaker than Kaido, then the idea that Yonkos are relative just wouldn't be true, and he shouldn't be stalemating her when they're both in their base form. His base form should be significantly stronger than her if that were the case. But again, beyond even all of that, I think that breaking bones is just a greater level of damage than giving scars, even permanent ones. Especially when, again, Big Mom is depicted as having to heal this to even continue fighting. And while it is implied that Kid and Law both damage Big Mom here, it's also implied that they both do 2 different forms of damage. One of them breaking her ribs and then one of them breaking her arm. So I think it should be fine to apply individually regardless. It's also worth mentioning that Law has an extremely overlooked feat that I see no one talk about often, often, and it's that even without any of his abilities, Law just swinging his sword was able to equally clash with the Gura no Mi. I genuinely don't know why this feat is so overlooked, as if it's not one of the strongest devil fruits in terms of just pure destruction and power. This is the same ability that was completely ragdolling Akainu when used by a Whitebeard who was like 2 steps away from his deathbed with stage 4 cancer and holes burned through his body, compared to a very healthy Blackbeard who is arguably stronger than just in general old Whitebeard, yet alone the Whitebeard in Marineford who's extremely fatigued and damaged. Maybe I'm missing something, but I just don't think that Zoro has shown anything that even remotely compares to this. And again, it may sound like I'm overhyping this, but it's also worth mentioning, Law is a character who specializes in durability negation or doing internal damage. The fact that his physical strength when swinging his sword could match this is incredible for a character who's never been shown to be physically impressive, especially when one of the win cons that you would maybe give Zoro generally speaking, like if you were just listing off categories in a combat setting, would be physical strength. But when looking at this feat, Zoro simply doesn't have anything that compares to this on a physical strength level. But moving on, durability wise, I know we talk about Zoro having 30 broken bones and that being super impressive and whatnot, but I don't know why people use this for durability. The fact that he has 30 broken bones means that his durability isn't that good because he can't withstand the damage that came to him. He's just able to continue fighting through it, which is endurance, not durability. And it's hard to even scale because yeah, sure, it's 30 broken bones, but it's 30 broken bones for Zoro. I think we could agree that what breaks 30 bones in Kaido's body would be far stronger than what breaks 30 bones in Zoro's body, just for an example. The result of any attack doesn't really scale it, and because Zoro only blocks this for a brief moment before Law teleports him away, you can't even scale his durability to this attack from Kaido and Big Mom because he doesn't withstand the brunt of it. Zoro honestly doesn't have any super notable durability feats if I'm being completely honest. His best durability feats would probably just come from King, who's not that strong in terms of AP to begin with. As for Law, his best durability feat is taking Thunder Bagua from Kaido and staying conscious, but also getting up moments later. Zoro is far too damaged for him to even move at this point, so he just doesn't get the same feat. The best thing you could argue is that, well, it didn't kill him, which doesn't mean much in comparison, but this is really impressive for Law, especially since unlike Zoro, he doesn't recover or get healed. He goes on to fight Big Mom after taking this attack with no recovery, and takes multiple attacks from Big Mom and her homies as well. But also, again, coming back to this feat and just how underrated it is, because he matched the Gura no Mi, again with just the swing of his sword and his own physical strength, he'd have to be capable of withstanding that same force. Obviously, every action has an equal and opposite reaction, so his body and or durability would need to be capable of withstanding the force equal to that of the Gura no Mi, at least to an extent. I'm not saying that it completely wouldn't damage him, but he would be capable of withstanding an attack from it, which is again more than you can say for Zoro based on feats. The reason you kind of can't argue the same thing for Zoro is how weird Haki can get. With Law, to our knowledge, it is just pure physical strength. Even when it's wrapped in his devil fruit, we don't know if that's adding any like level of power to it, as he's never shown an ability that does that. But Zoro adds Haki to his attacks, which don't inherently correlate to like the energy you output physically, and that then would be forced back onto your body. But he also doesn't have many examples of a clash. His best feat, for example, if you were to look at this at face value and say, oh, well, his attack potency does this, therefore it scales to his durability, would be Kaido. But he's using swords, which is a level of lethality. He's cutting through something rather than say punching something. While Law is using a sword, it's a clash. It's two things clashing against each other rather than just him cutting through something. So this simply doesn't work in the same way for most of Zoro's feats, because his best real clashing feat would probably be against Nesjuro, who is pretty hard to scale in the grand scheme of the story anyways. Law versus Zoro is kind of a fight that at one point I would have said is like an abilities versus physical strength and overwhelming power type of thing, but honestly Law should just genuinely be above Zoro in that aspect as well. But I think that alone is the reason why this fight is not even remotely close, because Law doesn't specialize in physical strength or durability or even speed. It's his abilities which makes him a very difficult opponent. So if he can match you in things like strength, speed, and durability and have those abilities work on you, it's kind of just not even fair at that point, which is why this fight is a complete mismatch in my opinion. Zoro doesn't have Future Sight. Similar to Kaido when he wasn't using Future Sight, a lot of Law's abilities will just genuinely catch Zoro off guard. Say Zoro is preparing an attack and saying the name of the attack, getting into a stance or whatever, and Law just randomly teleports him to a pebble close to him and hits him with injection shot out and teleports away before he can do anything. This is something that, based on what they've shown, is not impossible. If Zoro isn't specifically expecting him to do something, it's almost always going to catch him off guard, which is why in general, fighting Law is a hard thing to do if you don't know him. But even though Zoro does know Law, he doesn't know the intricacies of all his abilities and how they work. So he's still gonna get caught off guard by a lot of these things. Just the simple fact that you can be teleported at any moment in time is going to be hard to get around. You may say Law's abilities wouldn't work on Zoro, but there's just no reason to believe that. One, Kaido and Big Mom were negating his abilities passively. Their haki was so strong that it just didn't work. It's not in the case of Law where he has to actively flex his haki in order to negate Devil Fruit abilities. The difference between Kaido or Big Mom and Law was so incredible that they just did that passively. If Zoro was at that level, he would be able to do it passively, but Law was able to teleport Zoro around at a moment's notice constantly. Like, we gotta be real for a second. Zoro doesn't even know that he has Conqueror's haki. He surely doesn't know how to use haki to negate abilities. And even if you want to make some wild assumptions, at the very least he's never been shown the ability to do so. And so the idea that Zoro just allows Law's abilities to work on him wouldn't even work. We've even seen with somebody like Doflamingo, someone who has Conqueror's haki, that even if you do have superior haki to Law, his abilities can still work on you. There's just a clear tier difference when it comes to people like Big Mom and Kaido. But really, in any versus battle, if his opponent cannot negate his abilities and isn't drastically faster than him, he has too many win cons to even call it a close fight in good faith. That being said, let me know your thoughts on this topic or what you think. I'm sure absolutely no one disagrees, but that's going to be all from me.